The European Union is dealing with an escalating energy crisis as a result of the termination of Russian gas transit through Ukraine. This impasse, caused by Ukraine's unwillingness to prolong gas transit contracts with the EU, has had far-reaching consequences throughout the region. Qatar, a key supplier of liquefied natural gas to Europe, has warned that it may cease energy shipments to the EU in response to the bloc's newly proposed environmental measures aimed at reducing methane emissions from fossil fuel imports. This multi-dimensional crisis has exposed the EU's vulnerabilities and tested its unity in the face of mounting international pressures. The stoppage in Russian gas transit has immediately disrupted energy supply, notably in Central and Eastern European nations. Hungary, which relies largely on Russian gas transported via Ukrainian pipelines, has been among the most impacted countries. Alternative routes across the region's inadequate LNG infrastructure have worsened the situation, causing certain nations to rely significantly on gas reserves. The scenario has resulted in an increase in energy costs, with the benchmark Dutch TTF gas contracts rising considerably. This price hike has put pressure on energy-intensive companies, raised home energy costs, and contributed to overall EU inflation. Countries like Slovakia, Austria, and Hungary, which rely heavily on Russian gas, are under enormous pressure to find rapid answers. The EU's energy issues have been aggravated by extreme cold weather in the area. This has drastically curtailed renewable energy production, notably wind and solar power. The lack of sunlight and poor wind conditions have resulted in a reduction in renewable energy output, requiring the EU to rely more heavily on traditional energy sources such as gas and coal. This dependency has rekindled arguments about the sustainability and dependability of the EU's energy transition plan. While renewable energy is a key component of the bloc's long-term ambitions, the present crisis highlights the need for a more robust and diverse energy mix to provide resilience during catastrophic weather events. Hungary's Prime Minister, Viktor Orban, has reiterated his criticism of the European Union's sanctions against Russia, linking Hungary's prospective veto of the sanctions renewal to Ukraine's decision to suspend Russian gas transit to Europe. Orban claims that the gas transit disruption considerably exacerbates energy supply threats for Hungary and other Central European nations that rely on Russian gas. Since Russia's confrontation with Ukraine in February 2022, the European Union has imposed 15 comprehensive sanctions packages aimed at limiting Russia's economic ability to continue its aggression. These sanctions have been gradually increased to target critical sectors of the Russian economy. Since the beginning of the war with Ukraine, the European Union has imposed a series of comprehensive sanctions aimed at critical areas of Russia's economy. These measures include considerable limits on oil and gas imports. The EU has banned the import of Russian oil delivered by sea, as well as liquefied petroleum gas and some metal commodities originating in Russia, to further limit Russia's revenue streams. A price limitation of $60 per barrel has been imposed, reducing the revenues Moscow may collect from oil sales. In addition to energy-related measures, the EU has restricted coal imports from Russia as part of its large sanctions framework. These actions are intended to undermine Russia's capacity to support its military activities by cutting off crucial cash streams. Financial penalties have also played an important role in the EU's policy. The Russian central bank's assets have been blocked, thereby immobilizing a large amount of the country's foreign reserves. Furthermore, major Russian banks have been barred from using the SWIFT financial messaging system, an essential network for international operations. This prohibition has significantly limited Russia's financial activities and capacity to conduct business on a global scale. These coordinated sanctions reflect the EU's persistent attempts to apply economic pressure on Russia, while also displaying solidarity with Ukraine. The EU sanctions require unanimous consent from all 27 member states and are renewed every 6 months. The chemical, metal, and glass sectors are among the most impacted. These industries are dealing with rising operational expenses, eroding profit margins, and potentially pushing businesses to transfer costs onto customers or shut down entirely. Rising feedstock costs jeopardize the manufacturing of critical items like fertilizers and polymers, smelters, notably aluminum and steel mills, are experiencing operational challenges, with some cutting output or even declaring temporary shutdowns. Manufacturers of building materials and specialized glass face fierce competition from lower-cost locations, raising fears about factory closures and job losses. The surge in energy prices has fueled inflation throughout the EU. Economists predict that consumer price inflation in 2025 will rise by an extra 0.5 to 0.7% due to rising energy costs, exacerbating cost of living concerns. Higher energy costs have a significant influence on agricultural output, transportation, and packaging, making food prices especially sensitive. Elevated inflation may also push the European Central Bank to tighten monetary policy, thereby slowing economic development. Central European nations that continue to rely on Russian gas face significant issues as a result of the suspension in Ukrainian transit. Alternative routes, such as those via the Turk Stream or Nord Stream pipelines, are failing to compensate for reduced transit volumes. Ukrainian pipelines provide around 40 to 50% of Slovakia and Austria's yearly gas imports. The transit stop has prompted both countries to speed LNG import projects and increase pipeline links with other countries. However, these initiatives are unlikely to cover the whole gap in the medium future. While Germany has greatly decreased its dependency on Russian gas since 2022, the country remains subject to price instability owing to its industrial base. Key industries such as automobile and machinery manufacturing are already suffering the consequences of higher prices. As a major European gas consumer, Italy's energy-intensive sectors, notably ceramics and textiles, are facing rising costs. The country's growing reliance on LNG imports leaves it vulnerable to global market changes. The outages are straining supply systems throughout Europe, affecting companies that rely on consistent energy supplies. Smaller Eastern European economies, which lack strong diversification policies, are especially susceptible. This might result in unequal economic consequences throughout the EU, hampering collective policy responses. Europe's capacity to obtain sufficient LNG supply by 2025 is contingent on good global market circumstances. Rising demand in Asia, notably China, poses a substantial danger to European LNG procurement. The EU is aiming to increase capacity on existing lines such as the Southern Gas Corridor and establish links with North African sources. However, infrastructure restrictions and geopolitical dangers may impede these attempts. Without enough transit volumes, the EU may have to rely extensively on its reserves to fulfill demand, especially during periods of extreme cold. Analysts fear that this might leave storage levels dangerously low ahead of the winter of 2025 to 2026, increasing the possibility of energy shortages. If LNG shipments are stopped owing to geopolitical tensions or infrastructural concerns, The EU may suffer an energy crisis similar to 2022, but with different conditions. In January 2025, President Donald Trump repeated his position on trade, with the European Union highlighting the need for increasing the bloc's purchases of American oil and gas. He warned that failing to do so would lead to significant levies on European products. In a video message to the World Economic Forum in Davos, Trump lambasted the EU's trade policies and regulatory frameworks, particularly those harming US technology businesses. He claimed that the EU must make up its massive imbalance with the United States by purchasing American oil and gas on a vast scale, and that otherwise, tariffs would be the only option. Trump also pushed the EU to decrease regulatory burdens while increasing defense expenditure, proposing that member